Growing up, I was never the star of the family. That role had always belonged to my older brother. He was the charismatic one, the one who made friends effortlessly, the one my parents always bragged about at family gatherings. Me? I was just there. The quiet one. The responsible one. The one who got decent grades, never caused trouble, and did what was expected, but never anything that made me shine. I wouldn't say I resented him. At least, not at first. It wasn't his fault that our parents worshipped the ground he walked. He was their pride and joy, the embodiment of everything they wanted in a son. Meanwhile, I was just the extra. The afterthought. The one they praised out of obligation, not genuine pride. It was little things at first. The way my mom's face would light up whenever he entered the room, but she'd barely acknowledge me. The way my dad would drop everything to help him with something but tell me to figure it out when I needed guidance. The way every accomplishment of mine, whether it was getting into a good college or landing my first job, was met with a simple, "That's nice," while my brother's smallest achievements were celebrated like he had just won an Olympic medal. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their validation, that I would carve my own path and prove myself in my own way. But deep down, a part of me always wondered, what would it take for them to see me the way they saw him? Of course, I had no idea that the answer would come in the most ridiculous, life-altering way possible. The day my brother won the lottery was the day I officially became invisible. Before, I had always felt like the lesser son, the one who existed in the background while my brother shined. But after that day, I wasn't just overlooked, I was discarded. It started small, subtle enough that I could almost convince myself I was imagining it. The shift in tone when they spoke to me, like I was no longer part of their world. The way they would talk about extravagant trips, new cars, and shopping sprees in front of me, without ever once asking if I wanted to come along. I wasn't expecting a handout, but it was like they had mentally moved me to a different class of existence, one they had no intention of associating with anymore. Before, at least they pretended to care. Now they didn't even bother. Conversations became one-sided. My mother, who used to at least ask how I was doing, now only talked about my brother, his new investments, his new house, how he was changing their lives for the better. If I tried to share anything about my own life, my job, my struggles, it was met with disinterest or outright dismissal. "That's nice, but your brother just put a down payment on a beach house. Can you believe it?" Dinner invitations to family gatherings started becoming less frequent. At first they'd still call, but it was more of a formality, like they were inviting me out of obligation rather than genuine desire. Then even those calls stopped. I only found out about family vacations through social media, pictures of my parents and my brother lounging on a yacht, smiling in front of fancy restaurants, living a life I wasn't even considered a part of. One time I stopped by my parents' house unannounced just to visit. My mother answered the door, looking genuinely surprised to see me. She hesitated before letting me in, as if I had interrupted something. Inside, my brother was showing them his latest expensive watch, and my dad was beaming with pride. When I tried to join the conversation, I was brushed off like an uninvited guest. "We're in the middle of something, could you come by later?" my mom said, not even bothering to hide her irritation. I wasn't their son anymore. I was an outsider. It only got worse from there. They stopped asking me how I was doing. They stopped acknowledging my birthday. Holidays became about my brother and his wealth, what new expensive gifts he would bring, what grand gestures he would make. I wasn't jealous of the money itself. What hurt was realizing that it had never been about love or family. It had always been about status, about who could provide the most. And I was no longer worth their time. At first, I tried to ignore the signs. I told myself that maybe I was overthinking things, that my family wouldn't just throw me away like I was nothing. But deep down, I knew better. The shift had been too obvious, too deliberate. And then one day they stopped pretending altogether. It happened over dinner, though calling it dinner would be generous. I had been invited over, probably out of routine more than anything else. But the entire evening had been filled with subtle jabs. My brother sat there in his designer suit, talking about his latest investments, how he had just bought yet another luxury car. My parents listened, with admiration, completely absorbed in his words while I sat in silence pushing food around my plate. Then my father cleared his throat and looked at me, his expression unreadable. My mother, who had been practically glowing while talking to my brother, suddenly seemed to withdraw, like she was preparing for something unpleasant. "You know," my dad started, It's probably time you start figuring things out on your own. I blinked. What do you mean? My brother smirked, leaning back in his chair like he already knew where this conversation was going. My mother sighed, shaking her head as if this was something difficult for her to say. You're becoming a burden, sweetheart, she said, her voice coated in fake sympathy. We just think it's best if you learn to fend for yourself. I stared at her, waiting for some kind of punchline, some reassurance that this was a joke, but there was none. A burden? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. My father nodded. Your brother is successful now. He's figured things out and he's thriving. It's time you do the same. You need to learn how to navigate the world on your own. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had a job. I had been living responsibly, paying my own way, never once asking them for anything. And yet, here they were, acting like I was some kind of parasite leeching off of them, like I was some disgrace to the family that needed to be cut loose. I don't ask you for anything, I finally said, my voice shaking. I work, I pay my own bills. My brother scoffed. Yeah, but let's be real. You're not exactly thriving, are you? No big house, no fancy car, you're just existing. I clenched my fists under the table. I didn't realize love and family were about material things. My mother sighed again, as if I was exhausting her just by speaking. It's not about that, it's about responsibility. You need to push yourself, staying close to us, relying on family, it's only going to hold you back. Hold me back? No. What they really meant was that I was holding them back. My father gave me a small, forced smile like he was doing me a favor. We think it's best if you stop coming around so much, focus on yourself, build your own life. It was in that moment that I realized they weren't just suggesting I become independent. They were pushing me out completely, cutting ties, making it clear that I no longer had a place in this family. They had a new life now, a richer, shinier life where I didn't fit in. I had always known I was the lesser son, but now they weren't even trying to hide it. I was being erased. It had been a few years since I was pushed out of my own family. I had left with nothing but the clothes on my back and the bitterness of knowing that I had never truly mattered to them. There were nights I barely scraped by, nights I questioned if I would ever be anything more than the burden they had labeled me as. But I never stopped grinding. I had landed a job as a floor manager at a furniture manufacturing company. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't what people would call prestigious, but I took pride in it. I worked longer hours than anyone else, made sure everything ran smoothly, and eventually, the higher-ups started noticing me. First, it was small things, being asked for my input during meetings, given more responsibilities that weren't technically part of my job. Then came the real promotions, assistant operations manager, then head of manufacturing. And now, after years of proving myself, I sat in a private meeting room with the company's board of directors, listening to words that I never imagined would be directed at me. We're going public, the CEO announced, his hands clasped together as he addressed the room. And with that, we need strong leadership for this next phase. We've all agreed that we want you to take over as the new CEO. I blinked, making sure I had heard that correctly. Me? The CFO nodded. You've been running the floor better than anyone we've ever had. Your decisions have increased efficiency and profit margins. The board has full confidence in you. And, another board member chimed in, we want you to have a personal stake in this company's future. As part of the transition, you'll be granted a 10% ownership stake in stocks. I felt my chest tighten. 10%. Of a company that was about to go public. I wasn't just doing well for myself. I was about to become very rich. I kept my expression neutral, nodding along as they continued discussing plans for the transition. But inside, my mind was racing. Just a few years ago, I had been tossed aside like garbage, told that I was a burden who needed to learn how to navigate the world. My family had made it clear that I wasn't worth their time because I wasn't rich, wasn't successful, in their eyes. And yet here I was. Not because of luck, not because I stumbled into a windfall like my brother had, but because I had built something with my own two hands. I had earned this. I wasn't the forgotten son anymore. I was about to be richer than the family that had abandoned me. For years, I had completely erased my family from my life, just as they had erased me from theirs. I never reached out, and they never bothered to check in. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment my brother won the lottery, and honestly, I was fine with that. I had spent those years grinding, building my career from the ground up. While they were off living their extravagant lives, treating me like an afterthought, I was putting in the work. And now I was standing at the peak of everything I had built, holding the title of CEO, with a fortune in stocks and investments that made my past struggles feel like a distant dream. I never thought about them anymore. So when my phone rang one evening and I saw my mother's name on the screen, I actually had to check twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether I should answer. A part of me, the part that still remembered the pain of being cast aside, told me to ignore it. But curiosity won. I swiped to answer. There was a long pause before she spoke, as if she wasn't sure where to begin. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, because it lacked the condescension and superiority I had grown used to, she said, "Sweetheart, how have you been?" Sweetheart. I almost laughed. It had been years since she'd called me that. The last time I heard her voice, she was telling me I was a burden, that I needed to fend for myself. Now suddenly I was her sweetheart again? "I've been fine," I said flatly. "What do you want?" There was a shuffling noise on the other end. Then my father's voice came through, sounding hesitant, weak. We've been having some trouble lately." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Then, my mother sighed dramatically, as if she had been holding on to the weight of the world. "Your brother? Well, things haven't been easy for him. The money from the lottery, it's all gone." I felt a twinge of amusement. "Of course it was." She continued, her voice desperate now. "We made some bad investments. The house, the businesses we tried to start. It all collapsed. We have nothing left. And the debts. Oh God, the debts." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. I could practically feel the shift in power through the phone. The same people who had treated me like I was less than, the same ones who pushed me away because I wasn't successful enough, were now begging me for help. "What about my brother?" I finally asked, knowing full well what the answer would be. "He's struggling," my father admitted. "His business has failed. He lost everything in bad deals, bad loans, and now the creditors are after us too." "You need money." I finished the sentence for them. Another silence. Then, barely above a whisper, my mother said, "Yes." I closed my eyes, letting it sink in. The golden child, the one they had worshipped, had run through his fortune like water. And now, after years of silence, they only remembered I existed because they needed a lifeline. I had spent years believing I was never good enough for them, and now, I was the only thing standing between them and financial ruin. How poetic. As I sat there, phone still in my hand, a strange feeling settled over me. It wasn't anger. I had expected this call for years deep down. It wasn't satisfaction either, even though part of me wanted to revel in the irony of it all. It was sadness, not for them, but for the fact that even now, after everything, the only reason they had reached out to me was because they needed money. Not once in all these years had they checked in, not even a simple "how have you been?" But the moment they were in trouble, the moment their precious golden child failed them, suddenly I was their son again. The realization sat heavy in my chest. No matter how much I had changed, no matter how much I had achieved, to them I was nothing more than a tool, a lifeline they had forgotten until they needed to grab onto something. I exhaled sharply, forcing the emotion back. "All right," I said finally. "Let's talk." I heard the relieved sighs through the phone, the shift in their voices as they probably thought they had me wrapped around their fingers again. But they had no idea who I had become. We met in person a few days later. The moment I stepped into the dingy little cafe they had chosen, I could see it, how much they had changed. My father, once an overconfident man who spoke like he ruled the world, looked worn down. My mother's usual self-righteous air had crumbled, replaced with the desperation of someone who had lost everything. And my brother, he barely looked like the same person. The man who had been handed millions, who had once flaunted his wealth in my face, now sat slouched over, staring at his hands like he couldn't bear to meet my eyes. It should have felt satisfying. But it didn't. "Thank you for coming," my mother said, forcing a smile. "We knew we could count on you." I almost laughed. "You didn't know anything," I said coolly. "You forgot I existed." She flinched, but I didn't give her time to speak. "You said you're in debt." "How much?" My father hesitated before sliding a paper across the table. I picked it up and skimmed the numbers. It was bad. They had dug themselves into a financial grave so deep it would take a miracle to get out of it. They looked at me, expectantly. I met their gaze and with no emotion said, "I'll pay half." My brother straightened up. "Half?" he repeated. My mother looked panicked. "But, you thought I'd just wipe it all clean?" I leaned forward. "Like how you wiped me out of your lives." They looked away. I placed the paper back on the table. "I'll pay half. That gives you a fighting chance. The rest? That's on you." "But," my father started, but I cut him off. "You said you're living in a trailer park now, right?" I asked, my tone calm. They nodded hesitantly. I gave them a tight-lipped smile. "Good. So now you know exactly what it was like for me after you kicked me out? You told me I needed to fend for myself, to navigate life better. Maybe this is your turn to do the same." The silence was deafening. My brother clenched his jaw. "You have millions now. This is nothing to you." I stared at him for a long moment, then said, "And yet it's everything to you." His expression darkened, but I didn't care. I stood up, placing a check for half their debt on the table. "This is my final offer. Take it or leave it. Either way, you're going to have to learn how to make better decisions." My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father looked away, shame burning in his face. My brother just sat there, stunned. Had no sympathy left. I had already been abandoned once. This time I was the one walking away.